Hi, my name is Jordan Ramirez, and you are listening to a brand new episode of Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez. And with me today is my special guest, Lisa Dare. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you too, Jordan.
Oh, thank you so much. Now, the film that she has selected for today's episode is the 2004 film Hidalgo, released in 2004, directed by Joe Johnston, starring Viggo Mortensen, Omar Sharif, Louise Lombard, and Saeed Taghmaoui, as well as J.K. Simmons, and in a cameo role, the great Malcolm McDowell in a supporting role. So, why did you pick this film for today's episode?
Mm. Well, this particular film has a lot of significance for me, Jordan, because I think the first time I saw it, what really struck me was the story and the themes of the story. So, basically, it's sort of loosely based on a historical event with a fellow, the main character, Viggo Mortensen, who
Mm-hmm.
is actually of both Caucasian and indigenous heritage.
Mm-hmm.
This is set in the early 1900s. So prior to that, he had been like a courier during the Civil War. And when the film starts, he is basically sort of a bit down on his luck. He's in the Wild Bill show. But it's almost like he's a bit of what's the word I want to say, like a bit of a mockery of who he was, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he ends up being in this race across the desert. And there's a theme there around resilience. There's a theme there around connecting to roots. And there's also a theme around free will, the ability to choose and make choices that will determine the path that our life takes. And also a theme around determination and persistence. He's riding a Mustang, right, which they call
Mm-hmm.
the painted pony,
Mm-hmm.
and he's racing against all these thoroughbreds. So there's a number of different themes, and it just really impacted me so much that it's one of those films that I actually watch again and again every once in a while, right? Even though I know what the ending is, I will watch it again and again.
Mm-hmm. You did, yeah, I did see it that way from watching it. So it does start with in the film, he was at Wounded Knee where the massacre happened, and after that, the chief of the, I think it was the Lakota Nation, I think they called themselves in the film. He was part of Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, and as you mentioned, he does go on this race that's set in the desert, and he does meet with Omar Sharif's character, who plays a sheik in this picture. Where he is a sheik, it's not specified. I mean, this is almost like the film as I saw it was almost an homage to like the movie serials of the 40s and 30s period in that action adventure mold, and also a little bit of Indiana Jones, a little bit of it as I saw in the picture. It did have that Indiana Jones homage in this picture with the gun slinging action, and also the gun battles in this picture as I watched it. And you mentioned it's loosely based on the life of, I actually have it on my notes. It's loosely based on the life of Frank T. Hopkins.
That's right.
Uh, yes, and I had to do my research, and his history I read is debatable because there were historians that wanted to counter, saying that some of what he said was either true or whether he exaggerated this whole story. So it's debatable, but I wouldn't say like I would. I mean, he would claim that he was half Caucasian, half indigenous. Some people would say that uh, they found no records of him being indigenous. Again, it's pretty much like a tall tale story. But I thought the film was like a little bit of a tall tale, but also a bit of an adventure action film. And as you mentioned, resilience, finding your roots, and also a lot of those themes that you mentioned that I thought were very much in this film. But I like how at first it went from being like in the first half sort of this biopic sort of picture to the second half now being a sort of adventure story but set in the Middle Eastern desert, which I thought was pretty which I thought was like pretty much in the action adventure mold.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think to what you're saying, Jordan, it's also in that tradition of the hero's journey, right? That
Mm,
we talk that we see in many of these types of films, right?
yeah.
You said it's almost like that, along the same lines as the Star Wars,
Yes.
right? Series, right? With Luke being, discovering his roots, right? That whole thing of like facing adversity, feeling like they're not going to succeed, right? Because they're just being hit by one obstacle after another, and
Hmm.
where does it result in, right? And of course, as you said, many of these, when Hollywood comes along and
Yes.
dramatizes these stories, right? There's a
Yeah.
little bit of fact in there. There's a little bit that sort of makes it more watchable or appealing to the audience. Um,
Hmm.
and I don't know, in your research, Jordan, is it historically accurate? Because of course, at the end of the movie, they talk about the fact that with the purse that he wins from the race, he actually buys all the Mustangs that they were going to actually kill, right?
So in my research, I had to look up. Wiki has some like sources that I don't go to Wiki. I just go to wherever the sources they find them from.
Mm,
So it is debated. So in my research, I think this was largely an invention of Hollywood.
okay.
I think this was an invention of Hollywood because if he really did win this race and he did save the Mustangs, I think this was largely Hollywood's invention that he was portrayed as a hero. But again, it's a debatable fact. It's a debate because some say he's more of a con artist than actually his story is there to tell. And I also researched whether he was a part of Buffalo Bill's show. Some of the historians who looked up the shows that he performed, say in the 1890s, early 1900s, they couldn't find his name in them. So it to me it almost feels like it could have been based on a true story, but it's loosely based on a true story, meaning that some of it is true and others were mostly made up, is what I would say.
Mm,
Yeah,
yeah. Well, that's kind of disappointing because I like that part of the movie. I was
I
like,
know.
The Mustangs got saved. They weren't killed.
I mean, I wish that was true, but if he did, I mean, if the research did say that he did this, then I would have been saying, okay, then that part was true. But if it was largely an invention, then I'm like, I thought he really did do it, but I guess it wasn't how it was.
Mm,
But yeah, but also I liked that in the film you have, besides Viggo Mortensen, you had Omar Sharif, who was in the film The Sheik, who was fascinated by the American West. You see in one scene he has like a book of, like the Wild West stories that he has, and also he talks about he also talks about like Wild Bill Hickok and his gunslinging techniques. And as a present, he gave him like one of his guns before he departed back to the United States, which I thought was a pretty interesting gesture because I know I know Hollywood often tries to do their own versions of like the Middle East, or trying to do like their own versions of Arabic portrayals, often from the beginning of the movies up until the 2000s and 2010s decade, like the present. But I thought it was a pretty interesting homage to those types of movie serials. I mean, I know that largely nothing's going to be accurate. It's just going to be like left to the it's almost like it's a fantasy land sort of in this picture. But I do like Omar Sharif's performance in this film, as well as another one I mentioned, Saeed Taghmaoui, who plays one of the princes in the picture.
mm. Yeah, the character that also stood out to me was his daughter, right?
Oh
Because of
yes.
course the sheik doesn't have any sons, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course the daughter um ends up being somebody who really is kind of struggling with her own identity in the sense of, well, here's the culture and the environment that I'm in, but
Mm-hmm.
you know who she is as an individual, right? Why can't I do all the things that the men can do, right?
Yeah.
You know, that's not acceptable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there's the big moment at the end where, you know, he's talking to her at the end of the race, and then of course she does the unspeakable in their culture, which is to actually reveal her face, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
she's always got the face covering. You know, but he talks about, you know, free will, right? That's the thing that kind of stood out to me, is that, you know, we in a culture that promotes that, or you know, certainly, you know, speaks about the value of that, may or may not appreciate what it's like to be in an environment where that isn't being upheld, right? But then
Yeah.
of course there's the relationship between her and the father, right? Of like, oh my gosh, like this daughter that I've right, like keep a, you know, keep a rein on, right? But at the same time loves dearly.
Yes. Absolutely. I do like the daughter in the film as well, because as you mentioned, she is somebody trying to who is trying to go against the traditional norms of how the customs are portrayed in this picture, and also the fact that he had the sheik mentioned he had many sons, but they were killed, and now he has only one daughter left. And at one point he does call her like sort I think it was like to the I think he called her like the discarded or the unnecessary one, which I thought in my watching this film, I just thought that was a bit insult I thought that was a bit demeaning, but that was like part of what they see in this culture. But I do like that her character in the film, that even though she is a princess and she was in one point of the film, she was taken by this other prince who was supposed to marry her, but he was just only in it to, I think, take one of the take one of the books about horse breeding, which I didn't understand about that, but it's part of the plot, I guess.
Mhm.
Which I thought was pretty interesting, about the taking the daughter hostage in exchange for one of his horses that he wants to compete, I from what I imagined, which I thought it's something that I might have seen in other adventure stories where they do something like this and they have to come up with a negotiation tactic. And I thought it was pretty interesting that they put that in the film.
Yeah, and then of course there's the, um, you know, then I remember the other part of the plot being the other, the white woman, who,
Yes.
the
The
very wealthy white woman who
mhm.
also has, she has a mare in the race, right? So
Yeah.
to your point, Jordan, there's a bit of a social statement around, um, purity and lineage versus
Hmm.
that which is not, right?
Yes.
Which speaks to, you know, at one point in time, the view of, you know, what it meant to be sort of a pure background versus
Hmm.
a not pure background, and what that meant, right? Because there was
Yeah.
also that, because part of that the story is too, right? That desire,
Hello?
propagated through the horses.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So going back to this, excuse me. I have a little bit of a cold. Um, but yeah, it is pretty interesting with the purity, and also I also thought that the wealthy socialite who in the film, she's English, and um she also has sort of like this connection to the sort of antagonist of the film, who is one of the princes, that she would only do it if her horse wins, so that the other horse would. And also the fact that I also think that in the picture, when you see the relationship, not just between the two of them, but also the other characters saying that the American cowboy shouldn't be a part of this because he doesn't belong there. He, as you mentioned, like a purity and background, and also some, and also like your own free will. Um, I also thought it was a pretty interesting perspective, that even though Frank Hopkins in the film is the only American competing in this race, and the others are basically like Middle Eastern princes or horseback riders. I thought it was a pretty interesting. I thought it was a pretty interesting facet, and also in this film because I also thought this somewhat goes back to a little bit of Indiana Jones, that he has this one person who is helping him or assisting him. I'm trying to remember his name, but I only remembered him as he was becoming so foreign to these like objects that Frank Hopkins brings over, and also he's trying, and also at one point he picks up, I think, sort of a necklace, and he says, "Is that the symbol of your country?" And which was sort of like, I don't know if it was like a peace medallion or if it was like a symbol from an indigenous from the Lakota Nation, but he put that as in the flag as part of like who
Mm.
Frank Hopkins is representing, which I thought was pretty interesting a usage in that picture.
Sidekick, so to speak, right? Because he's sort of
Yeah.
like, he gets the assignment and it's kind of like, okay, great, I drew the short straw, right? I gotta go with the American cowboy, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
um, and then I think there was the little boy too, right?
Yeah.
Um,
He was a slave in the picture.
Yeah, and of course there's also that moment in the film where of course he's still drinking quite heavily, right? Frank is
Yeah.
drinking quite heavily. And at some point, I think it's actually the fellow that's assigned to him to kind of be his whatever we want to call him, like a, an assistant or whatever it is, or
Mm-hmm.
but he sort of says like, yeah, you really don't need this anymore or something. Like it was something to that effect, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, that whole piece around like, oh, yeah, kind of drew this like crappy assignment, but in the end they somehow develop this bond as well, right? And it's like
Yeah.
the underdog, and of course, the metaphor being like the dark horse, right? The Dow goes
Yes.
the dark horse, right?
Yes. Absolutely. Um, so yes. So I do like this film very much, and I remembered seeing part of it well, not part of it. I do remember seeing it when I was in school. I think it was back in the late 2000s and the early 2010s decade, and I do remember either seeing commercials of it or like it was heavily promoted as based on a true story, which I thought was pretty much as we discussed, it's debatable. So did so when did you first see this film, as far back as you can remember?
So probably, gosh, right, it's hard to believe we're in 2024.
Yes.
Um, Probably around the same time as what you're mentioning, Jordan. Like it
Uh,
was like in that, or like sort of the mid 2000s ish.
yeah. Yeah, like oh
Um,
four oh five. Uh,
yeah, like probably I'm gonna say maybe about 4 or 5 years after the release of the film. Like
okay.
I don't even know how I came across it, but I know that I happen to we have a great public library system and I have to get it from the library. It's just
Yeah. Yeah.
browsing, and I got to be honest, the appeal was Viggo Mortensen, right? Because this was like
Yeah.
I think when I watched that film, it was after he had done Lord of the Rings, and of course he was the character of Strider, right?
Yes.
In Lord of the Rings, right? So he was so, I think, perfect for that role, right? That kind of um rugged but mysterious, right? You didn't really know what was going on with him, right? And as you said, there's sort of that swashbuckling
Y-
element, right? Because there's
yes.
as you said, in Hidalgo, there's the gunfight that goes on, right? And sort of
Mm-hmm.
the whole bond between, rider and horse, where,
Mm-hmm.
the horse just knows exactly where to be when he signals him, all that, right? So,
Yes.
but again, I think that's where kind of initially the appeal was like, oh, I didn't know he was in this film. And um, not that I'm a big horse person, but I must say, that really got me much more fascinated in also the horse culture, right? And how
Mm-hmm.
man, not just man, but humans and horses have evolved together over time, right? Which is a very interesting story as well.
Yes. Um, it does, and I do see that relationship in the film, from the beginning of the movie up until the last scene in the film, which we mentioned. He saved the money to save the horses from being slaughtered. I think you mentioned it was. But I only remembered this film because it was part of the whole Disney campaign back in the early 2000s up until I don't remember when the last time they did this, and they did this whole series of like movies based on a true story cycle, which was like Remember the Titans, or The
Mm.
Rookie, or Miracle, or they had The Greatest Game Ever Played, or all these movies where they were based on like true stories, but they were more sports oriented type stories, if I remembered. So that was pretty much why I remembered this film, because it was like part of that whole cycle when Disney was trying to go for that type of angle of like based on a true story type scenarios, which I thought was what I remembered in that decade.
Yeah, and there seems to be, so I guess as a tactic, right, there seems to be an appeal
Mm-hmm.
for people around that because it's like, oh my gosh, that like, and we have the expression, right, of like, what is it, life or something about, fact is more interesting than fiction, something to that effect, right?
Uh,
Or truth is more
yeah,
interesting than fiction.
yeah.
Um, and I think in what you're saying, Jordan, there was also in that same genre, right? There's the I don't know if it was a Disney film, but there was Rudy, right, about the
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Notre Dame.
Yeah, I think that was TriStar, but yeah, it's still in the same point.
Yeah, that same sort of genre, right? Because there was a number of them, but yeah, it's I honestly don't remember how it was it came to my attention, but
Mm-hmm.
as I said, there was a couple of points that sort of attracted me. And as I said, the overall theme of the story, right? I don't know that I necessarily gravitated as much to is this a true story or not, but
Mm.
it was more just the themes, as I said, the human element of the film,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the persistence, the resilience, the coming up against the obstacles, prejudice and racism,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Differences, right? Differences coming together, right? All of those.
Mm-hmm.
Um, being similar themes and values that I uphold, and things that attract me when in the work that I do, right? So I think that's kind of where that whole thing kind of.
Okay. So actually this would be a great segue to so now that we mentioned a little bit about the film, so tell us about your occupation, what it is you do, and if there is a connection between what you do in your occupation and maybe what you see in this picture.
Yeah, so in my day job, I actually have my own coaching and consulting business. So my primary sort of area of work is in the field of executive coaching.
Okay.
And I work primarily with individuals and teams. And so the area of focus for me is around leadership development. And there's, really a whole number of things that I do around that. I also facilitate, so I teach courses, and also do consulting work on different projects as well.
Mm,
And I would say, Jordan, the connection for me is really around the fact that I love what I do because it really is about helping people to bring their impact into the world.
mm,
And I like to do that through helping people develop their leadership. And I think in this film, there are many aspects of leadership that we see, right?
mm-hmm,
There's not only the leadership that we think about when we think about somebody running an organization or leading a country, but it's also our own personal leadership as well, right? What sort of decisions are we making in terms of how I want to live my life? Am I living my life in alignment with the values that I uphold, or am I disconnected from them, right? And if I am disconnected from them, what choices am I making to bring myself back online if I feel that that's important? And so for me, any films really that have themes and elements of that really have are ones that really appeal to me, because these are the same things that I deal with in the work that I do is how do I help people as leaders deal with all those human elements of their life to be the best version of themselves and to lead people in a way that is in line with their values.
Oh, that's amazing, and thank you for sharing that. So I know that we still have a few minutes. No, well, not a few minutes left. We still have like 8 minutes left. But um, so do you have any recommendations that are similar to what we have discussed in this episode, or probably not as much as you would mention, besides the films that I had mentioned before?
Jordan, I am also a huge fan of Stephen King's work.
Okay.
So another film that really speaks to me is The Shawshank Redemption. That's
Oh
another,
yeah, it's
yeah,
really good.
yeah, that's one that I watch often. And in fact, a couple of weeks ago, I quoted it in my newsletter that I put out. I have a weekly newsletter. If you recall, there's a scene where in the prison yard, Andy, right, the two main characters, Andy and Red, are having a conversation, and
Hmm.
Andy says to Red, "Do you ever think we'll get out of here?" Right. And Red kind of says in a bit sarcastic way, like, yeah, he goes, when I have a big white beard, and he said, I've only got a few marbles rolling around up in my head, right? He said, whatever, Andy. And Andy says, well, you know what I would do? He says, when I get out of here, and he goes, yeah, what? And he says, well, I want to go to Zihuatanejo, right? Because remember, he has the dream of being on the ocean, right? Having that
Yeah.
business. And Red says, yeah, okay, whatever, Bud, right? Because he said, well, I don't know how you're going to do that. Because he said, Andy, we're here. And he said, that's over here, right? So it's kind of like he's saying, he says it's a pipe dream, right? Is the
Hmm.
term that he uses. And Andy kind of looks at him and he says, well, he said, I guess I have two choices then. He said, I can either get busy dying. He said, or I could get busy living.
Mm.
Right. And it's just like, it was almost like a mic drop moment, right? Because it's like,
Yes.
that's just like a slice of life, right? Because how many of us are choosing to be really busy living, and how many of us are actually really busy dying?
Wow. It is a powerful statement from Andy Dufresne to Red in The Shawshank Redemption. So excellent recommendation. And I haven't seen the film in a while, but it's good to go back on it. And I think it's one of Stephen King's greatest works, adapted for the big screen in '94. Originally wasn't a big hit, but in the years that followed, it slowly gained traction and became recognized as one of the great films of the 1990s decade and of all time.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and Jordan, I have to say, I just love your encyclopedic knowledge of
Yeah.
films.
Yes. Yes. So that's very kind and thank you. So where can my audience find out more about you, or maybe reach out to you if they want to have an expertise on coaching and maybe what you do in your occupation?
Well, I am on Instagram, Jordan. I'm also on Facebook as well, and LinkedIn are kind of the main places that I hang out.
Okay.
I also have a weekly newsletter that would be happy to have people subscribe to if that's of interest to them. And it's really just, kind of a weekly sort of musing on something that's happened in my world, and just sort of connecting it to the work that I do. So they can check out any of those links to just connect with me. I have a website, but it's under construction right now.
Oh,
So look forward to getting that completed in the near future.
okay. Thank you so much. So LinkedIn, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. I almost said Twitter. LinkedIn,
You have
Facebook.
Twitter as well, just not
Oh,
as and it's X now, right? Because it's like
yeah, X. X, Twitter, it doesn't matter. To me, I just still use its former name. I don't know why X would be something. Okay, LinkedIn, Instagram, X, or Twitter, and Facebook. And you can also check her newsletter. So, what is the name of the newsletter?
You know what? I just I don't have a name for it. But it's just something that I put out every week. So it's just my little Lisa Darren Associates little newsletter. So
Okay, Lisa Darren Associates newsletter. And it's been great having you on. And before we wrap up for today's episode, do you have any last statements or what the audience can expect before they go out and see this film Hidalgo that maybe they had never heard of, or maybe they just were not that interested in it, but maybe they could be interested in it just for just for something to recommend?
yeah, you know what? I think Jordan, the whole film experience is about getting immersed in a story, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, you know, absolutely, of course, we'll all have our different kind of biases when we watch films, but
Mm-hmm.
for me, it's about getting immersed in that story and connecting to what it was that the producer, the director, and the actors in the film are trying to really communicate through that story. I heard a director speak about, you know, why film for him is such an important part of his world and why he chose to take that work on. It's because he wants to share these stories with the world, right? And communicate something really special and important through that. And so I would really encourage people to kind of maybe not focus so much on like, is this factual? Is it not? But what's the
Mm-hmm.
story? What are they trying to convey through this story? And how is it connecting for me, right? What's meaningful for it about me, to
Yeah.
me, right? And
Yes.
what can I take from it?
Yes. And such inspiring words. And I will say, you know what? Um, despite, as you said, whether it's factual or not factual, I would just say I would get past it and just watch it as it is, as an entertaining film, as a film that you, as you said, you would immerse yourself into this picture and just look at it as the hero's journey, the story about who he is, about how he accomplished this, what were the obstacles that he faced, and also that we can overcome these prejudices, we can overcome these difficult themes of like uh just examining who you are, your identity, also about cultural identities as well, and also about what it means to be a moviegoer who just wants a story about what it means to see something that maybe as a viewer you may not like it, or you may like it, but it depends on who sees it. But you know what? I just enjoy it for what it is. It's a fun movie, it's an engaging movie, and it's also, it's also a movie that does feel inspirational uh to all those themes that we have discussed on this episode. So I thank you for this movie that you recommended, and I enjoyed it very much.
Well, thank you, Jordan. It was a really great pleasure to chat with you and love your idea for this podcast. So
Oh
much
yeah.
fun.
Yes, thank you so much. So this is Jordan Ramirez signing off, and you have been listening slash watching my interview with Lisa Dare, our special guest, talking about her film choice, Hidalgo. And until then, I'll see you in the movies. And Lisa, I hope that we can meet in the future. So thank you for being on this episode.
Well, thank you, Jordan.
You're welcome. And I hope that we get see each other in the future soon.
I do too.
Okay. So until then, I'll see you in the movies, and I'll see you soon, Lisa.
Bye, Jordan.
Bye.